Okay, we are recording. Sananda, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Stu. I'm happy to be here, and I'm fine. Thank you.
Oh, good, good, good. Look, Sananda, I'm so excited for this episode today, and I've been blessed already that you've sent over the song picks today, and there's some fantastic songs on there as well. So I'm really looking forward to chatting about them and obviously chatting about your music as well, of course. But I always start the episode the same way, and I ask guests to tell me the song that they regard as having the greatest ever intro, please.
I would probably, for someone who has such a vast appreciation of music as I have had since as early as I can remember, that's a very, very, very tricky question, which would be tricky any day of the week. Um, but if I'm looking at intro as far as not just the logic and the beauty of or the impact, but if I look at just everything. Um, the way an intro is meant to grab you from the very beginning, if it's a well articulated intro. I don't think anything does that quite explicitly as does Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen.
Yeah,
Because first of all, there's no instrument that speaks more closely to our heart and our own experience than the human voice. And when you have a voice as inimitable as Freddie Mercury's, and the way he was so carefully able to layer so beautifully those vocals, it's breathtaking. And it's not only the execution that was breathtaking, but the whole composition is just absolutely extraordinary, and one of those songs that you can just that only grows in your appreciation in time because of just how immense it was in its execution and realization when it first came out,
yeah,
especially as the age that I was. It had an, a young teen. It had such an immense impression.
yeah. I mean, interested to know because that song's such a vast song that goes in so many different directions, and what we see now in the way that lots of people are now consuming their music through things like Spotify, and even seeing the younger generation discovering music through apps like TikTok and things like that. Um, One of the things that I'm always intrigued to talk to songwriters about is I guess even if you go back to Motown, the whole thing was like grab them right from the off, and you talked about the instant connection you get with Bohemian Rhapsody, and straight away when you dropped If You Let Me Stay, instantly intros just bang pulls you straight in from that piano roll. Um,
Which I, by the way, ironic that you said that, because the other song that I was going to put um, with Bohemian Rhapsody in that category was "I Want You Back" from the Jackson Five.
Piano roll straight
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's exactly where I got the piano roll idea
Oh,
from.
really?
Was "I Want You Back," because when I was a kid, again, we're talking about so many choices, but just the impact it had on me when I was a kid,
Yeah,
and what the Jackson Five meant to us at the time as kids, and to the culture as well, and to the broader culture we were a part of. So that was the other song that I was in two minds about, um, as far as impact.
yeah.
So it's ironic, but for sure, "I Want You Back" I was referencing when we were producing "If You Let Me Stay."
Yeah. And and I guess where I was sort of going with the Bohemian Rhapsody as an example is now in the world where it would appear attention spans are getting shorter, and there's so much more pressure now to hook people on these Spotify things with an instant intro, and you see so many songwriters now in more modern, I guess, pop circles, starting songs with the chorus and trying, because it's with these streaming services, there's so much music available that you've got to try and put them in a crazy world now. It seems bizarre to think that if you was to take a Bohemian Rhapsody, which is ingrained in our culture as one of the greatest records ever made, if you took that to a record company now, they'd probably be like, well, hang on, it's a bit slow to get started there, and oh, it goes off on a bit of a direction there, and I just wonder, where I'm going in this long way to get to the question, Sandra, is when you're writing now, do any of these kind of things that have changed so much from when maybe you first started writing to now in regards to how people are getting the music for these streaming services and it being saturated, does any of that filter through into your creative process?
Um, as a songwriter, no. As a publisher, yes. Um, so maybe as a publisher, I might make a recommendation to the songwriter. I might say to the songwriter, you know, that Christmas song you wrote, um, would be much better if you changed it to a birthday song because it's a really good song and Christmas only comes once a year, but it's somebody's birthday every day.
Yeah.
So that's where the publisher hat will come and say, um, I can see how excited you are about this material, and I know you'll probably want to play it live. But if it's a Christmas song, you can only play it live if you're doing gigs at Christmas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's what starts to influence you is that, but as the songwriter, you always follow the same template. You follow your inspiration, you follow what excites you, and you trust the vast cornucopia of knowledge and experience that you've gained not only in practicing your craft, but in enjoying for so long the great craftsmanship of others.
Yeah.
So you do understand that you do have a certain taste and you trust your taste.
Yeah.
You know that the same taste that can recognize a great timeless Sinatra record um, doesn't change when it comes to hearing something somebody made yesterday or something that I created.
Yeah.
It's the same, the value is in the ears. So but to the point of you saying about our attention spans getting shorter, well, what we know of what we define as intelligence is a construct anyway. It's not necessarily a natural construct. It's a societal construct that basically says we will consider you intelligent when you meet certain criteria as has been programmed by our systems into your mind,
Yeah.
which basically none of us have until we're given our different clues and instructions from our families, from our societies, from our educational systems. The reality of the situation is, in order for them to maintain control of the civilization they're investing in and the societies they're investing in, they have to invest in programming a culture as to what is and isn't acceptable, what thoughts or what thought directions are acceptable, which ones are not, what social behavior, what's antisocial behavior. It is a socialization process. But along with that socialization process also is the inalienable fact that who has the most money and capital are the ones who are going to be most invested in our programming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the bottom line is since it's not even a secret, it's being explained in plain sight that they will have less use for us in the future because that they will tell us, they are telling us already that as many of us that can be replaced by machines or other forms of intelligence, they will absolutely take advantage of that.
Yeah.
It doesn't make much sense then to invest too heavily in the infrastructure of raising the intellectual capacity of a society that you're basically starting to wean away from your need for them.
Yeah.
You kind of almost have to make them kind of simpler to appreciate simpler things, simpler pleasures, simpler solutions, and not really think too much or too deep because then that's when the problems start, when the cows start thinking for themselves. It's also pretty contagious.
Yeah.
And it only then takes a few steps before we realize that whatever your religion, whatever your gender, identification, whatever your tribal affiliation, you're no threat to me. Um, the only way that you're a threat to me is if I actually give a shit about what you think of me according to your indoctrination or your programming. The point being is that I don't care whether someone else is racist. I only care that it doesn't have the right, that their racism doesn't have the right to affect the policy in the way that I live my life.
Yeah.
I'm not naive. We are all in different levels of development, psychologically, emotionally. Some of us are bearing a lot of trauma we don't even understand. And there's a reason why we tend to not be comfortable with other people when we are driven to those extremes. So I don't have a problem understanding why we people are dispersed amongst the different developmental stages of our humanity, because there will always be those who are barely waking up and there will always be those who can see.
Yeah.
So, it's almost as if they feel a responsibility to kind of dumb us down, because, well, part of the reason you educate and invest in education is to inherit a workforce who knows what the hell they're doing. Okay? Basically, that's the only reason the state is paying for anybody's education.
Absolutely.
And as well as to have conditioned citizens who basically are much easier to control than they would otherwise be. None of that's a criticism. That's statecraft.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. But it's just to say that just because we are being deliberately dumbed down, my standards and my level, the level at which I wish to attain and maintain uh, proximity of, or proximity to, that doesn't change. So if it just means you wind up getting fewer clicks, you still will always have a core that you can depend upon of people who trust your level of commitment to what it is that you've committed yourself to.
Yeah.
And so you don't worry about that. It's like a relationship. Any relationship has its ups and downs, its curves, its bends. I've been making, music professionally for almost 40 years. And in many respects, my audience is much broader than it's ever been. And I I've never been a person like, oh, what are my numbers? What are my numbers? I don't check for that. I just know that if you put the horse in front of the cart, you can get things going.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you put the cart first, and obviously all those other things and considerations, it just gets in the way and it bogs you down, and it robs you of your authenticity at some point.
Yeah. Sananda, I'm going to ask you um, if you can tell me the track that you remember hearing. It was the first track that had an emotional impact on you, please.
I have to put two songs because in my mind they're all this one event, and that was "She Loves You" and "I Want to Hold Your Hand" by the Beatles. I was 2 years old, and literally the first memory I have in this body is singing, walking around the house in our apartment in, at the time, New Jersey, East Orange, New Jersey, singing those two songs. And I probably only got away with it because I was that young, because otherwise I wasn't allowed to listen to that kind of music in our home.
Mm.
Because I know I didn't get it off the radio in our home. It just shows how ubiquitous that music was in the area that I was living in at that time in 1964.
Yeah.
Because those are literally the first two memories, not just songs. Those are the first two memories I have.
That's crazy. Your earliest memories, the Beatles. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Um, and tell me a little bit more. I mean, you said that that wasn't usually the music that was being played at home. Like, give me a sort of a picture of home. What was it? A musical environment, and was there instruments around? Like, what was home like then?
Um, yeah, it was a very gospel church music oriented situation. Um, so there was like maybe half the time I guess there was a organ or some kind of instrument in the house, because my mother used to play the organ in church as well as the choir. She led the choir. So there was that around. I just remember there was always music around anyway, because I was also growing up in very musically rich environments in communities. So there was just always music around. Somebody was always playing something or hearing something, or you heard somebody on somebody else's porch. Um, you know, one lady across the street was playing Beethoven. You know, the guy next to her was playing like the banjo on his porch. You know, another guy was listening to a Robert Johnson record. You know, then, you know, the next guy down was like playing harmonica or playing some country music. Everything was around and filtered through. And precisely because everything was forbidden to me, of course, as these things play out, it only had that much greater an exotic allure.
Yeah, of course.
Any music that wasn't church approved music was just automatically more juicy and sexy and sensual. And, you know, even people like Lawrence Welk, who had these shows on TV where even when they were playing polka music, to me, as long as it was music and I heard rhythm and harmony and melody, it was manna from heaven.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I was maybe 16, 15 or 16 that I was finally able to start bringing my music into our house. So um, I had to live clandestinely by cousins and other neighbors if I wanted to listen to
Yeah.
records.
Tell me about your relationship with the Beatles. Was that something that continued throughout your life and their career?
Um, I just paid a small fortune for a Beatles book encyclopedia that was released a few weeks ago. Well, actually, my wife got it for my birthday. Um, but the point is that they were genuine heroes. They weren't false idols for me. They proved. Um, and it's like Bach or Mozart or Beethoven or Duke Ellington or Frank Sinatra. There are people who make music that's so exquisite in its timelessness that it's above and beyond time. It doesn't matter what era it was made in. It exists outside of individual eras. Um,
Where where do you think that comes from, Sananda? That magic that makes certain bands. I mean, looking forwards in your list as well, there's many more songs on your list that fit into that bracket as well. Where because there's a billion songs on the planet, but there's only a sort of infinite amount of songs that just transcend time that could be released today and still sound as fresh as they did when that was released in the early 60s. Like, what do you think creates that divide from just great music and then something completely sublime and timeless?
the sublime, you've just answered the question. The sublime is a real spirit, it's a real quality, it is a real thing. We don't just have names for things. If we name things, it's because we, at some point in our evolution, have identified that those things are real and worthy of being named. So, you could call the sublime a form of grace. You could call it a form of beauty. Um, but there is a poetic and graceful quality in everything that is sublime that it just it just hits that right space in your heart whereby it exists as its own law and is as its own evident proof. So the thing is this, when you come into contact with that, that's like thunder. You don't call that when you snap your fingers. I mean, I think Paul McCartney became an even greater songwriter as he progressed, but he still only wrote one yesterday.
Mm.
Okay, I think Bob Dylan is written some incredible songs, but like a Rolling Stone, has a quality that nothing else he's ever done has. And I'm not saying it's because it's his best song. I don't get caught up into that. It's just there's sometimes when our existence is kissed by a grace, by a moment in time where the lightning rod is struck by the lightning, and there it is.
Yeah.
And and you can hone your craft, you become a better writer, you can become a better performer, musician, singer, but you'll still only have that particular moment in time once. Even as you go on to be acknowledged, you make like these many great records or whatever. And the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that it doesn't matter how much growth Paul McCartney underwent after he wrote Yesterday. The greater point is he was never going to be exactly that Paul ever again.
Yeah.
And this is what happens when the moment the wine is in the cup. It's a specific cup. It's a cup with your name on it, but it's there it is. And that chalice is forever there. But it might only need to bless you once.
Yeah.
It might only need to make that one appearance to draw up the awareness that you have that thing. And then the rest, you just go on with what you've been left as inheritance. But there are moments when every songwriter can tell you something comes to them that came through them and not to them.
Yeah.
And, you know, those are those moments in time where, you know, where Springsteen were Born to Run, the convergence of all that went into that record was never going to happen ever again. He was never going to be that guy at that age, at that time, having amalgamated those experiences to then correlate into the next phase he presented it in so that we could be moved and touched by it.
Yeah.
He's going to write greater songs, but he's writing them as a different person. So, you know, I had to undergo the same thing as like, you know, how come you didn't write another this, another that? Because I was not that same guy.
Yeah.
And it's not, you know, in a consumerized society, we would often frame that as a failing. But it isn't. It's just, you know, the point that the whole Chinese proverb of no one steps in the same river twice. So you can go on, you can build, you can do all this other stuff, but there are those moments in time that you spoke of where, you know, Queen had records be perhaps even bigger than Bohemian Rhapsody, but that particular piece of work there was never before anything like that.
Yeah.
And that always gets the benefit of not just nostalgia, but that always gets the benefit of the doubt when something seems to come out of nowhere and exist.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just happen to creative people. It happens to people like Freddie Mercury who are absolutely convinced of their own vision.
Yeah.
And when they can see it, they're adamant that you let them realize what that vision is, because the other side of that vision is us talking about this piece of work now.
I'm going to ask you to tell me the song that reminded you of your time at school, please.
Again, there were two choices because they were like the A side and the B side, or the double A side of particularly my high school years. My memory is very much on the two big albums were Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life and Peter Frampton Comes Alive. So I remember going to the gym in our school, the workout room in our school, which was mandatory if you were in, you know, you could take you could take physical workout classes. It just seemed like always you either heard Frampton or a Stevie Wonder song. It was and encapsulated by "I Wish" from Stevie, and "Baby I Love You Way"
Yeah.
from Peter. So those are the songs that, I mean, of course there were a lot of stuff, a lot of different things, but those songs seem to have been like the ones that I most associate with that particular time in my life.
Yeah. Did you enjoy school?
No, I hated it. I fucking hated it.
Did you did you know what you wanted to be when you was at school?
No, well, let me rephrase that. I hated high school with a passion. I hated second half of junior high school because I had a fall from grace type situation. I was like one day the most popular kid in junior high school, and the next day I was a pariah because of some some bullshit that I got set up to participate in. Um, basically these two guys jumped me, both of whom were individually almost twice my size. And I wound up defending myself with my Afro pick, which is like, well, first rule number one, don't mess with a guy with an Afro. It's probably got an Afro pick on him.
Yeah.
But I was being pummeled. So, in the politics of that particular time and place, my profile wasn't the one that was given the benefit of the doubt. So I wound up getting suspended from school for defending myself against two guys. That was the irony of that wasn't really lost on me. And by the time I came back, my status in the school had completely shifted from two thumbs up to two thumbs down.
Yeah.
And so basically, that followed me going into high school, where I lost a certain trust of authority, if I even had any before that situation. And yeah, it was miserable, but that was less important than the fact that I really loved studying. I loved academic pursuits. I still consider myself mainly self-taught because I had a basic general working class American public, yeah, we call it public school. You guys call it private school education. So I found that my saving grace was being highly motivated. I just did a lot of work on my own. But I think at some point my intellect caught up to it and I wasn't kept on the same track that might have kept it more interested. So I kind of got bored and just did everything I could to just get through and, look and look good in the process academically. But I couldn't wait to leave school. In fact, I went to university for a year. And then after a year of university, I was also bored and horny because basically I graduated. They wanted to put me up 2 grades earlier, but my mother only allowed 1. So even as a freshman in college, I was still a high school kid age-wise. And I'm rooming with my roommate was a cousin of mine who was one of the starting players on the football team. This guy had a physique like Adonis. I mean, he was just like, you know, whatever. But every time I would come back to the apartment, he'd be banging some chick, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I'm consigned to the couch in the other room, the only other room we had besides the bathroom. And I think that plus the fact that I was disappointed, disillusioned in what I thought university was going to be. It was a great school, the University of Central Florida. Go Golden Knights. But I just kind of felt that the Army was actually more intriguing, someplace that would take me out of the world that I was in and start to let me see the world. And so I dropped out of college after a year and joined the military, and that was one of the best decisions that I've ever made.
How did you? Because I know that you boxed at a good level as well, and I've it's been a big part of my life that as well, and there's a hell of a lot of discipline involved in that, and there's a ridiculous amount of discipline involved in being in the military. Like, how did you, with your experiences of school, and kind of, how did you then find the sort of levels of discipline that were required? Was that something that actually sat with you, or something that you kicked back against?
Yes, I've always been very disciplined. Um, I've always said that I was drawn to boxing in the military as part of my warrior training. Artists are also called at times to be warriors. Warriors, not necessarily for just justice, but for truth, for beauty, for the spirit, what's real, for less artifice and more true emotion, um, more curiosity on intellectual pursuits. We're kind of liberators in a way. We're trying to liberate your spirit. At the very least, we're trying to distract you from the fact that there's a lot of other shit going on in your life. So I think the military and the boxing were training for that mentality, to show myself and remind myself of who I was. And I still am able to call upon that discipline to this day when I need to.
I'm going to ask you to tell me the first record you remember buying from a record store, please, Fernando.
I bought Superstition by Stevie Wonder, but I had to hide it at a cousin's house, um, because it was the same cousin who used to live a couple blocks down the street from me in Daytona Beach, Florida. And he had a sister about a year older than him, and Tiger and Ladybug. That was my cousin's name. They were called that. And they one day I went over to see them, and they were really excited when I came to the door. They said, "You gotta listen to this record. You gotta listen to this guy. This guy, he's blind, and he does a song." And he's like, and they started spewing all this information. So I went into their room, and they had like a little dance set. Remember the dance sets?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
They had kind of a little dance set. Put on this 45, or a 7-incher, as we used to like to say. Um, Put on this record, and I was just completely blown away. It was Superstition. Another one of the great intros of all time,
Oh, ridiculous.
and so the next thing I remember is I remember going to the shop, saving up my little allowance money over time, and buying Superstition. And I also bought I Want You Back from the Jackson 5, which I had heard many times before, but I didn't own the record. And so I thought if I was gonna break the Lord's religious vows and buy one record, I might as well buy two.
Damn right.
Double up on the cost of the spin, share the costs. The accountant's way of thinking.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about the impact the Jacksons had on you and Stevie Wonder and the Beatles as your career started to explode. Did you ever get a chance to sort of meet these people that had such an impact and influence on your career?
Yeah, another group that has to be fundamentally uh, mentioned as foundational influences of the Stones.
Yeah,
Um, and so for me, the way I kind of uh, anthropomorphize it, I see kind of like the Beatles as my mothers, and more, and the Stones is like the father influence who didn't necessarily stick around, but cast such a large shadow that you paid attention to everything they did.
yeah, love
So,
that.
I didn't want to be Mick or Keith. I wanted to be Mick and Keith.
Yeah,
Likewise, I when I was putting the notion together that I might be able to write songs, um, I saw the way Paul tended to approach his songs in a more jolly, jovial kind of um, vertical way. Like Paul's melodies are very vertical. John has a very horizontal sense of melody, more zen, fewer notes, but just right at the heart of what the situation is.
yeah,
So, also what they now call math rock.
yeah,
John was already doing that shit with
yeah,
probably half the great songs he wrote, has some section of it where he goes off with off an off kilter time signature. Um, but one of the pivotal things that happened for me was I remember um, being invited to Mick's 44th birthday party way back in the way back Pleistocene era. And I walk into his house, and he hadn't come downstairs himself yet. Madam Jerry uh, let me in. And she said, oh, she was fawning over me, and I was like so moved. And I just happened to the room she let me into. I saw his record, his sound system. Of course, I got to go over and see what Mick is listening to. One of my great heroes. And it was my record that was on the turntable.
Man, how cool is that?
Like I was completely like blown away. In fact, I felt in retrospect, it was probably pretty intimidating because later at the party, I'm there with basically the British rock aristocracy. And everyone was there, and all the Stones were there except Keith. And I remember sitting across from the late great maestro Charlie Watts and seeing this immaculately dressed English country gentleman who bears no resemblance to the image you have of like the bad boys of rock,
Yeah,
you know, and he looks like he stepped right out of Savile Row, and he was just so moving how much it one of my heroes was enjoying the life that his creativity had created. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
so that things like that where you wind up. I also had another incident where I was I at the time I was had a place in Knightsbridge, but I was also recommended by my accountant to put some money into some other property. So I also had a guy. I had a place in Chelsea, right down the situation. Um, and I'm at the apartment. I'm at the apartment in Chelsea, and at the time, my daughter and her mother were at the other place. And her mother loved to throw parties and was a very good hostess. So I'm at the apartment writing because I want to get away from because I don't know anything about the party except she's having a party. But I want to do some writing and focus on some. So I went to the apartment to get away from it. I called back maybe a couple of hours later to inquire about whether I had left something there that I needed at the apartment.
Okay.
And when she answers the phone, I hear my piano being played. I'm very territorial about my piano. Who the hell is that playing my piano? And she says, oh, Don Henley and George Harrison. So I'm like, wait, okay, so don't play with my emotions. You okay, Don Henley, yeah, cool. But George Harrison. She says nonchalantly, of course. So I think I break a land speed record. I guess the apartment was about 2 miles from the house. And I literally could have probably made the Olympic squad with how quickly I got to my front door. And then when I got to the front door, I stopped and said, come on, catch your breath. What are you doing? You're about to meet one of your greatest heroes. So I composed myself. I went in, and before you realize it, me and him were sitting cross-legged from each other upstairs in one of the rooms, just having a heart-to-heart.
Wow.
And it was one of like the great moments of my life because, you know, I've only called my mother twice when I met someone because I knew she would be as moved as I was. One was a gentleman by the name of Milton Berle, one of the legendary American entertainers.
Mm.
Um, and the other, I was like, I met George Harrison and the Beatles. This is after I had been wearing Anello and David shoes that were the shoe designers and makers for the Beatles. I absorbed all of that I could. So I make no apologies. It's the same as if I listen to Bach. I understand that I'm not just listening to echoes of grace, but I'm also listening to a foundational reminder of the foundational laws and rules governing our music, of harmony and theory and all of that stuff. It's the same when you listen to the Beatles. I can't, which is why I can't listen to them all the time. I have to have moments because it's very emotional for me, and it takes me back to this place that I lose control over. But also because it's like these are your primary lessons right here. There are certain artists that just take you right back to school,
Yeah.
and they're one of those for me.
Sananda, tell me the song that soundtracked you going out clubbing.
Again, my second choice, very closely, narrowly, was another one of my great heroes, Rod Stewart. Do You Think I'm Sexy? Because that was unavoidable for
Mm.
years after it first came out.
And
But
what
I
a switch up! What a switch up for him as an artist. That to embrace disco and nail it with a song like that. Like,
nailed it, nailed it. Stones did the same thing with Miss You, though.
yeah,
They just fucking nailed it.
yeah,
But again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Stones have always been about groove anyway.
yeah.
And Rod has always had an incredible ear.
Mm.
If he hasn't written the songs, he's chosen such great songs to cover, to sing, and make his own. And he's always had great bands and great musicians.
Yeah,
So, um, yeah, but I would say Billie Jean because that was the other song, unavoidable song, or a certain time of your life where, I think I was beginning to come into my own as well, understanding who I was, getting closer to understanding it, and starting to understand the way the shape my life was going to take and the way that I needed to go to accommodate that shape. Billie Jean is just one of those songs that was so ubiquitous to that particular time and place that was in the inevitable choice.
yeah. I mean, what an intro as well. We were talking intros. I mean, that's about as iconic as it gets, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Despite our differences, I mean, he was absolutely a genius, and yeah, you see the proof of the pudding is right there in the eating.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to take you home for the next track and ask you to tell me a favourite song from an artist from your home county, please.
This particular question confused me because I didn't know whether county was a misprint of country or county or home county means something different to the Americans than it does to you Brits.
Sananda, everybody has just said exactly what you've said on over 500 of these episodes. I need to really, when I send these questions, make the word county in massive letters. But when I saw your answer, I presumed it was country. So we'll roll with that.
Okay, yeah. I took it as country. And because if it was from my home county, I would probably say Refugee by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers
Oh, what a record.
because, and another great intro,
Yeah.
because I can remember being 18 and driving to boxing practice. I had just got my first car, used car, and I was driving to boxing practice, and I literally heard on the radio Refugee come on with that organ swell and in the intro. And that I literally had to pull over, like one of those cliches where I had to pull over and absorb what I was hearing. And what was great about Tom, who I'm a huge fan of, and had the privilege to get to know a little. He was only from up the road to where I grew up in Florida, and I have relatives where he grew up in Gainesville, Florida.
Yeah.
And so I was very familiar with that area. So when I heard he was from Gainesville, and he had all of those hallmarks of that I could recognize. He had the southern music tradition in him. He had the British invasion stuff down pat. He had this great love of guitars, so he also understood the theater of rock and roll, and he was just an incredible songwriter. And so that, if it would have been home county, I would have probably said Refugee, Tom Petty, but I interpreted his country, and God only knows from uh, Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys is my choice.
I mean, that falls straight into that category of
Manna from
just,
Heaven.
just where's that come from? Where on earth do you pull a song like that from? And I actually got to see him perform Pet Sounds a few years ago where I live, and that Pet Sounds is one of the greatest records ever made, and
Absolutely.
and it was all so beautiful. But then at one point, the band left the stage, and he just sat at a piano, and he just played God Only Knows, and the audience was full of men my age and probably a lot older, and there was just a moment where everybody was sort of looking to each other, sort of looking over each other, and everybody's bottom lip was going. It was so
Yeah.
beautiful and so moving because Brian's voice is more fragile now and is broken a little bit, and it just adds something even more beautiful to it. And oh
Like
man,
like the way like Billie Holiday's voice at the
yeah,
end.
exactly that.
But it was so much more poignant and emotional. You know, one of the coolest things about for me about fame was it allowed me to give back the love to the heroes that had contributed so much to my life. So one of my fondest memories is the record company was throwing me a party once in Los Angeles, and Brian Wilson turns up. And he turns up with his bodyguard, and I'm so distracted by him and I'm trying to keep him happy. I don't even really pay that much attention to the fact this is my party. You know, I just want Brian to be happy.
Yeah,
So at some point, one of my people in my crew or something says, "Hey, you've been invited to another party. There's this really cool party happening down the Sunset Boulevard. It's cool, let's get out of here, right?" So I say to Brian, I say, "Brian, we're going to another party. Would you like to come with us, please?" He says, "Yeah, sure." So I'm in the back of a convertible. I was still living in England at the time. So we had rented this, these cool like 66 Chevy convertibles or whatever. Thunder might have been a Thunderbird. All I know is it's a picturesque full moon. I'm in the back of a Thunderbird convertible with my arms like this, and one of them is around one of my heroes, Brian Wilson. And at one point, we're riding down Sunset Boulevard, and I turn to him and I say, "Brian, I'm almost embarrassed I said this, but this is what I said. I said, this is not some gay shit, but I really, really love you." And he had this really humbled, bashful look on his face. Well, thanks. Thanks. And I just leaned in and gave him a kiss on the cheek. And that that was that was that moment where I could see it mattered to him. He hadn't become so jaded. To see somebody of that generation who said, like, I study you like you should study someone if you want to be a raw producer
mm,
and a writer. But it's those moments that really stand out where you get a chance to say something back to these people
yeah,
who have had such a huge inspiration to you. You know,
absolutely. Sananda, for your last track, I'm going to ask you to tell me a song, please, that you think many of the listeners may not know that you would like them to go and check out.
they must check out the timeless classic, an artist who was years ahead of his time. Okay, this was in a way Sacha Baron Cohen before Sacha Baron Cohen. This was performance art before Andy Kaufman. Okay, and he went by the name of Tiny Tim, and he sung his ukulele, God bless his heart, "Tiptoe Through the Tulips." And if you deep dive on him, which is a interesting thing to do if you ever have that kind of time, you will find he also had this amazingly deep, wonderful baritone operatic voice. He was a very, very, very interesting man.
Fantastic.
And it's kind of began with me using it to troll people, but then I realized that no, I was deceiving myself. There was just something so courageous about this guy because he was also Boy George before Boy George
Yeah,
in the way that could be presentable and acceptable at that particular time. So there was something Oscar Wildean about Tiny Tim,
yeah,
to mention obviously Dickensian. So yeah, I would like for people to get turned on to the magnificent vision of the innovative genius that was Tiny Tim. And let's start with Tiptoe Through the Tulips.
Wonderful. Well, Sananda, we make it really easy for people to do because we put together a little Spotify playlist of all the tracks that we've spoken about today, so people can go and check that out. Um, Obviously, we'll be putting your music on there as well, and we've been speaking about so many other people's great music. We've not really spoken about yours so much. So what's happening? What's coming?
On May 11th, I have my next project coming out. It's called the Pegasus Project, Pegasus and the Swan. It's it's the finale of a trilogy that began with Prometheus and Pandora, and then Pandora's Playhouse was the follow-up to that, and this is the end of this particular episode in the life of this particular artist that we have been during this point in time when we were undergoing all of this. So it's 2 CDs worth of material. It's a great mixture of my normal, usual, in your face, whatever the hell we're gonna call post-millennium rock, mixed with some orchestral and chamber music renditions of my songs as well. And so it's a very, very diverse project in its textural approach. I'm very proud of it. On March 15th, on my birthday, we released our first offering, which is called the birthday song.
Mm-hmm.
On April 13th, we will be releasing another snippet called Mr. Magoo. And on May 11th, we're going to just say, forget all these snippets and let's just release the hounds.
Yeah.
And I think it will be a very enjoyable experience. I know I'm very proud of it. And I had been waiting for a while for the right time to approach an orchestral approach to my work. And the gentleman who was responsible for putting the orchestral aspect of this together, Diego Basso, a gentleman from Verona, just one gentleman, not two. He has been approaching me off and on for decades to actually do something with him and his orchestra. And finally, he was able to corral me into committing to it. I'm very glad that I did. And one thing led to the next, and I began to realize that my usual way of making records was going to have to share space with this approach because initially I thought it could be 2 separate projects, but somewhere early enough in the process, I realized that I was deluding myself and it was better to allow it to become what it in fact will be as and when you listen to it.
Yeah. And to quote you, once the hands have been released, are you going to be touring? And essentially, are you going to be playing in the UK?
We're doing like a teaser show in the UK. I guess in Brighton at a festival, Love Supreme Festival. Can check the date. I'm off the top of my head, I don't remember. But we've only accepted one because we've been putting together a lot of situations whereby it will enable us to come and focus exclusively on England when we're ready, which will be later in the year, we imagine, no earlier than later in the year. But we do plan on focusing more on Old Blighty,
Yep.
back to the United Kingdom. Since like you bitches now have a king, that will be an interesting experience to see how you've changed in the
Yeah.
process of adoption.
Um, and if people want to keep up to speed with the next snippet release, the album release, tour dates and such, where's the best place to keep up with all things Sananda?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. Sananda.org and sanandamaitreya.com. And I think there's another one as well, but those are the 2 main ones that we focus on, sananda.org and sanandamaitreya.com. Someone pointed out that www is short for World Wide Web, but it actually takes less time to say World Wide Web, which is only 3 syllables. www, which is 9 syllables.
Yeah, crazy, right?
So it's to expedite time, World Wide Web, org. And it's Sananda.org or World Wide Web, SanandaMaitreya.com.
Fantastic. Well, we'll put the addresses in the show notes of this show, so people can just they're one click away from it, so they can go and find out about everything that's going to be happening for you. Sananda, it's been an absolute privilege, mate. I grew up so heavily influenced by what you was doing, and it's been so nice to get an opportunity to sit and chat to you about music.
Well, I always knew a stew would come good because certain names inspire a certain kind of confidence or a relaxed nature in you. You hear them. Certain names I hear and I like know, oh, this is going to be tense. And then there's certain names you don't already know you have like a good karma with those vibes. So I just want to say I haven't actually performed live in England in 22 years, and um, in the meanwhile, I've been committing myself to a body of work that when I was ready to share it, everything would be self-evident as to why I committed myself to the task that I committed myself to, and why I'm very proud of having trusted those instincts, and I will be absolutely proud to be back among my British brethren and family members. I have British family as well, and to share what it is that I've been blessed to receive in the intervening years.
And we will be looking forward to that, mate. Trust me.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it very much, and thank everyone there. Your podcast, um, behind the beat with us, so on the
Off the beaten track.
beaten track. Yeah. Okay. So I really appreciate it, and I'll turn you back over to Madam Francesca. And thank you. This has been painless, and I appreciate it.
Wonderful, Sananda. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome, Ed. Anytime.
Hi, Stu. Thank you so much.